I always ask my guests, what title do you recommend for this episode? And you said, "Why are you excellent?"
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what made you pick that title?
Well, so my branding, obviously, as a professional speaker, is about excellence and business excellence. My podcast is called the Business Excellence Podcast. But why excellence? And so, where did the idea of excellence come from? A couple of years ago, I was interviewing companies about culture for my next book, and which still hasn't been published because COVID got in the way. But I was talking to a company, and they had as one of their core values the word excellence.
Why are you excellent? We can never be perfect, but being excellent means being the best we can be, showing up and being our best self. I'm Emily Harmon, host of the Onward podcast. In 2013, my guest, Rael Bricker, was given a rude awakening when, after a season of triathlons, he decided to run a marathon. And all of this was part of his plan before turning 50. But each time he ran, Rael experienced neck pain, and soon he discovered he had 2 blocked arteries. Listen to this interview and learn how this experience helped Rael find his purpose in life, which is sharing the experiences of journeying and achieving excellence with business owners and entrepreneurs around the world. As his surname suggests, Rael is all about laying the right bricks as the foundation to your personal and business success on the journey to excellence. The Onward podcast is brought to you by my business, Emily Harmon, Coaching and Consulting. Now, let's go to the interview.
Rael, welcome to the Onward podcast.
Good morning, and thank you for having me on the podcast, Emily.
Yeah, I know. This is so cool with technology. You're all the way over in Australia. So it's 6 a.m. your time and it's 6 at night my time.
And it's pitch black here already because it's, midwinter.
Midwinter, yeah. And we're heading into...
Yeah, I was going to say it's not really midwinter according to most people in continental US, but it is midwinter here.
Yeah. So what's the temperature in
10 C, so 45, 50 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, it's pretty cold. It was about 75 here today. So it was yeah. So, the Onward podcast is all about facing adversity, moving forward, discovering ourselves along the way. And you and I met at a podcasting mastermind group, and, we decided I'll be on your podcast and you be on mine. And I'm excited to have you here. And with all the things that you shared, I know that this is going to be a really good discussion. Yeah. So you said that in 2013, you were given a rude awakening because you had done a bunch of triathlons and then you decided to run a marathon. And, that was part of a plan before you turned 50, right? And then each time you ran, you had some neck pain. And what did you discover from that neck pain?
Well, yeah. And I, being this believer in myself, and I guess that's been my philosophy my whole life, is just you can do anything you want to do, just get out there and do it. And I went, yeah, whatever. And I went to physiotherapy, and then the physios would say, oh, you've got a bit of, C4 or C5 pain, and we'll massage it out. And eventually my mother-in-law, bless her, said, you're not looking well, okay? Mm-hmm. And go and see a doctor. And I have a friend who's a radiologist, and I phoned him and I said, I think I'm turning 50. I probably need to have a CT scan of my heart. And pretty much, I'll use the breast cancer analogy, but, women are encouraged to have breast scans at the age of 50 and then onwards, because and the first scan really gives you your baseline of where you're at. Well, so I thought, let's have a scan of my heart and it'll give me a baseline. And I did the scan and I flew to Singapore with my wife. We were going with friends. In fact, that radiologist was one of my friends with us on the trip. And we went off to Singapore, and there were 4 couples, and we go away on these trips every before COVID, that was, okay? Mm-hmm. We would go to the best restaurants and drink the best wines and really have a great sort of time, adult conversation for 3 or 4 days. And we were there in Singapore. I got a call from my general practitioner, my doctor, who said, don't panic. Last thing you want to hear is don't panic.
Yeah, don't make me panic.
He said, don't panic. I want you to, by the way, I know you're coming back on Monday afternoon, so please go and see this cardiologist. I've made you an appointment for 9:00 Tuesday morning. And he told me what they'd found. And he said, go and buy some aspirin, start taking aspirin, and don't take Viagra. Those were his instructions. Okay. Yeah. So they found out that I had 2 blockages, one quite serious at 90% in the back of my, and one of 75% in your LAD, your main descending artery. And so because I hadn't had a heart attack, I'd been suffering from angina. That was the neck pain. And we all think of angina as this pain and this tightness in your chest. Well, the advice I give people is you've got this weird pain that comes from a particular series of activities. Think about it. Like, I didn't think about it at all. I thought I'm a big unit, as they say in Australia. I'm built square. I'm not built for long distance running. And so I thought, well, it's my body just complaining about running, about running longer distances, that I'm running badly, I'm moving badly, and yet it was a heart problem. So that was a rude awakening, but it did focus me on doing what I want to do, being excellent, stepping out there and being the best I can be every day, and really finding my passion, which has always been being on stage. So I've never not on stage for the last 20 years. I built my financial services business by standing on stage, talking to audiences about how to retire, how to buy property, how to set up their mortgages. So I've done all that. And I went, now I want to actually share how to build a business with people. And that was the evolution of my life since 2013. So
I got a couple of questions there. So why did that experience, how did that experience, why was it that it was that experience that helped you find your purpose in life? Is it that when you realized, wow, life is short?
Yeah, life was short. And also, my late father died at age 59 from multiple organ failure. He'd been on dialysis. He'd had his kidneys had failed when he was in the early 50s. And so I'd always been obsessed with health. And suddenly my obsession with health was held up under the spotlight and went, this is out of your control. This is genetics. When I followed the genetic trail back with a doctor, both my parents had infarcts, had heart attacks. 3 of my 4 grandparents had heart attacks. So there was a genetic line there that kind of should have been this red flashing light, and it wasn't, because I felt I was infallible. I just done triathlons. Business was going really well. We had topped $2 billion of mortgages a couple of years before that. Things were going well. I was in the top 5 brokers in Australia, and I was on this, and the high actually hid what the truth was, that there was a ticking time bomb.
That's interesting. I've been on a high before too, like that. And I've just stayed really busy so that I don't really notice things. Just for an example, the other day I went to the dentist. I had a cavity that I didn't even know was there, but he couldn't fill it that time. So once I knew it was there, then I started feeling the pain. But before that, I think I've just been kind of busy, focused on other things, didn't really notice that pain in my.
Yeah, 7 years later, or 8 years now, since the stents was April 2013, I am definitely probably fitter and stronger than I was then, although 8 years older.
Right.
But it's focused me differently on doing things differently, on like the podcasting, like telling my story, like writing my book. That was triggered out of that whole thing, was coming out of it. I've got a story to tell, and then you get imposter syndrome completely.
Yeah. Who wants to hear your story?
So I wrote the book, and then I put it away for 2.5 years because I thought no one wants to really hear the story. So yeah, it was that awakening that actually told me to follow a passion, and my passion was being on stage. So I built the mortgage business by being on stage, but my passion was being on stage. Mm-hmm. And I must say, when I look back at the first 3 or 4 years as a speaker, I was horrible. I was giving a message and I was giving information, but it was all about me. It was, these are the problems I experienced in my business. I don't care whether you're experiencing them, but I'm going to tell you how I fixed them anyway. And it's only the last 3 or 4 years that I've actually had, again, this sort of light shining in my eyes. And wake up, you've got to actually tell people how to solve their problems, not yours. And so it's a journey, it's an evolution, and that's what's fun about life. And if we can keep our health, then everything else is fantastic.
Well, one question I had for you is you talked about that you were talking in your speeches and presentations about financially preparing for retirement. And there's a lot of financial advisors out there and people talking about how to financially prepare. And when I was working for the Navy, I took a couple different retirement courses to make sure I was ready. And they all seem to focus only on the money aspects. And there's so many other aspects of retiring. What do you want? What are your dreams for your life when you retire? I mean, I retired at 56, so it wasn't like I'm retiring and I'm not going to do anything else. It's like, how do I dream? What do I want to do? Where do I want to live? They don't really cover a lot of the things that you really need to consider, because retirement's not all about money.
No, retirement is, if you have the money to retire, then you can do. So I was lucky in my life. I'll go back a whole lot of years. At age 37, I sold my business into a listed shell, or a small listed company. I joined them for a period, and we made 9 acquisitions over a period of 18 months, and 10 times the share price of that business.
Wow.
And I was only on a 1.5-year contract. So I was made managing director of one of the other listed companies. I ran that. I turned it around, was turnaround management. And then my contract was up, and they didn't need my partner and I, because we were both on big salaries at that point. So I left. It was mid-1997, sorry, not 87, 97. I had views of pursuing a PhD. That was the thoughts that I had at the time. I got accepted into a number of world business schools, but my ego got in my way for a whole variety of reasons, because I'd just been on this high. I'd listed the business. I was this wheeling, dealing guy in Johannesburg, and then I would have to go and be an assistant to a professor for a couple of years while doing a PhD. And I went, doesn't work for me. Okay. Mm-hmm. But most people don't get to retire, because I had a restraint of trade agreement. I effectively had to retire for a year at age 37.
Okay. And you couldn't compete.
With the businesses I was in. And so I did some weird stuff that year. I got a pilot's license. I did a course in holistic healing and massage. I took my wife and a 3.5-year-old and a 1-year-old on a 4.5-month round the world first class trip.
Wow.
So a lot of people say, when I retire, I'm going to do X.
Why wait?
So I was lucky. I got to do a lot of that stuff, travel the world, do some fun stuff at that age. And then I was rejuvenated and ready to go back into it. So at age 49, having the stents was almost like that again. It was, let's step back, let's breathe, and now let's focus on what I want to do. So after that year, I went into venture capital. I was still consulting, so I wasn't working full time. And then I came to Australia, and I ended up working with a VC fund here and listing that on the Australian Stock Exchange 2 years later. But that changed my whole focus of passion. It rejuvenated me. Yeah. It gave me an insight into retirement. So when I was talking to people for years about building a property portfolio to give them wealth in retirement, yes, I focused on that, but I also spoke about the fact that wealth would allow them to have the freedom to do things.
Right.
And the bigger your portfolio, the earlier you start. So I'm not a psychologist. I'm not a counselor. So I never really got into the discussion about lifestyle, where do you want to live, all that kind of stuff. I was really focused on, if you create this pool of wealth, this asset, then you can retire earlier when you have your health, and then you can do a lot of the things that are on your bucket list.
Yeah, true.
But in order to do that and not live on the pension, well, you have to actually do some things in your own life and make some sacrifices to build up those assets.
Yeah, you are really fortunate to have those 2 different breaks at different times of your life.
Yeah, I mean, like teachers is a good example. In Australia, most companies actually give people long service, and generally at 10 years of service. Now, millennials will never get there because they don't stay with an organization that long. Right. But most staff and teachers is a great example. Teachers after 10 years of service get 10 weeks. So they get a week of additional leave for every year. And so after 10 years, they get 10 weeks of leave. So, And then with their annualized leave, that's basically a 3-month break from working.
That's amazing. I think the most I ever took when I was working, the most I ever took off was maybe 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, but I think it was like 10 days time off.
So that's part of it, is that gives people that refreshing break. So it allows them to do that stuff, to be a bit more flexible. So, another thing that they've done in Australia for teachers, as a good example, is they would allow them for 4 years to get paid 80% of their salary, not 100%. And then in the 5th year, not to work and get 80% of their salary as well. So take off a year's sabbatical. So take 4 years' salary and get it paid over 5 years.
Oh, that would be awesome. I'd still be working if some of those options were in place. I think part of what we're discovering with COVID is, some people, there's a lot of articles in the paper now about how people aren't going back to work. They've had some time to reevaluate. And now that their companies want them to come back and sit at a desk, they don't want to do that anymore. So it's the workplace policies are going to be very interesting to watch over the next year.
Well, yeah, I mean, on Monday this week, I spoke at a conference of accountants, of CPAs. And one of the things I spoke about was the challenges of remote work. And so how do you, as a manager, how do you manage your team members when they're remote working? And that's okay. So I asked a number of professional service firms how they do it, and they said, "Well, we don't care. You have to do 7.25 hours of work a day and billable work, and that's what you have to do working from home, and that's okay." And then I asked one of the mining houses here, and they said that people have projects to do, and they have to finish their projects on time. They have to be online between 10 and 2, accessible. That's it. The rest of the day, they can start at 6 a.m., they can start at 10 and finish at 6. They don't care. They have to get their work done. So philosophical change between those two organizations. But what struck me was the ethical dilemma. And I actually, in my speaking, I talk a lot about ethics. And you come out of a military background where almost that ethical line should be drawn in the sand most of the time.
Right. Yeah.
And it's a very defined line of what is the ethics. Well, in business and things like that, it's not always that defined. And so I put to the audience an ethical dilemma. I said to them, what happens if one of your managers in your team posts a picture on social media at 2:00 in the afternoon that they're sitting in the pub having a beer? I said, they are perfectly entitled to do that because they got up at 6 in the morning. They've done all their work. They've done the 8 hours work by 2. They are fully entitled to do that. So, do you call them up on it, or do you say there's nothing you can do about it under HR policies? But the bigger problem from an ethical problem is, how does that look to their team members if the team members see their boss in the pub at 2:00 in the afternoon having a beer?
Yeah. In the military, we talked a lot about the appearance, whether you might be following the rules, but the appearance is also important.
Yeah. And so absolutely. So that's, I talk a lot about those ethical dilemmas where it is a gray line. Mm-hmm. And that's one of them. So, I mean, working from home, one of the other trends I'm starting to see globally, because I do a lot of work in the culture and research area, and I research a lot of cultures around the world, is companies doing something called work near home, not work from home. If a corporate downtown head office will shrink, and they will take smaller offices in suburban hubs. Mm-hmm. And there'll be 10 workstations, depending on the size of the organization, 15 workstations. And employees will book in to work at those workstations 5 minutes or 10 minutes. I was going to say 2 or 3 miles, but having been in some US cities, like on the 405 in LA, that 2 or 3 miles could take you, a few days actually to get across. But so that work near home concept is kind of the compromise where people will still be around people.
Right.
They don't have to be there every day, but we still like warm bodies. We still like to be around people. As much as people say it's great to work from home in my jammies, well, yes, but the human nature, there's a show, I don't know if you've seen it, Life Below Zero.
No, I have not.
It's a show. I don't know. It's one of the cable channels, and it's about 4 or 5 family stories about families who live in remote parts of Alaska. And there's one particular participant in the show who runs effectively the most northern refueling station for planes, and her nearest neighbor is 300 or 400 miles away.
Wow.
And so she really lives on her own, but there's very, very few people in the world who have that ability
to
live on their own, and it's so we are by nature social beings,
right.
So therefore, you're right. So it comes down to people don't want to go to the office because it is much more fun. But interestingly, Microsoft have said their staff are 25% more productive working from home. Now, that's great for Microsoft. Is it good for the staff? We're talking about revelations, and overworking yourself. And,
right.
The Japanese had a concept many years ago of people who actually literally died at their desk because, and I can't pronounce the word in Japanese, but it was a word about literally being wedded to the company. And companies, in the 80s had sleep pods in the office. So people would go from their desk to a sleep pod and back to their desk. And because commuting was too long to go home, and so they'd spend the 4 nights in the office and then go home on a weekend. That craziness of the world, that is going to change. Those cultures do change.
Yep. Carl Sean, I hear an echo. I don't know if you hear it, Rael. Carl Sean, thank you. Yeah, hello. Thank you for tuning in for a little bit. So, Rael, you said that, because I always ask my guests, what title do you recommend for this episode? And you said, "Why are you excellent?"
Yeah.
I was just wondering, what made you pick that title?
Well, so my branding, obviously, as a professional speaker, is about excellence and business excellence. My podcast is called the Business Excellence Podcast. But why excellence? And so where did the idea of excellence come from? A couple of years ago, I was interviewing companies about culture for my next book, and which still hasn't been published because COVID got in the way. But I was talking to a company, and they had as one of their core values the word excellence. And I said, that's interesting. Why do you have excellence as a core value? And the definition they gave me was that no one can ever be perfect. All we can be is excellent. And that means showing up as being the best self that you have every day. And so yes, to challenge people and say, you are excellent. Everybody can be excellent, which is just being their best self, showing up their best version of their self every day. Now, that doesn't mean you have to suppress your feelings. It doesn't mean you have to suppress your emotions. You having a bad day, show up as a person having a bad day. That is the best version of you on that day. And that's a problem we see in corporates. That you were in the military. Men don't cry. I know that's a sexist comment, but
right.
But the idea of men don't cry, well, it's the same thing. If you're having a bad day, you've woken up in the morning, you've kicked the cat, all those sorts of things, you have to show up as your best self, as your excellent self. And the problem is that we try and hide that because we have this view, this Instagram view of perfection. And we have this Instagram view that's how we have to show up every day. And when you get out of your own way, you actually become excellent.
That's really, I like that. I like that. Right. A lot of times we put on a facade or a mask, kind of hiding how we're really feeling. So I'll tell you today, before this, I have a headache, but we went ahead and did this. I'm showing up being excellent. I took a Tylenol before this, and I'm going to be excellent today on this interview.
Well, that's, so I do a lot of work around disc profiling. Now, when I use disc, and I say to companies, disc, DISC, and they go, oh, not that old thing again. And I go, well, yeah, it is old. It's been around since 1929 in disc. In fact, if you go back many, many years, the idea of 4 behavioral styles was actually developed by Hippocrates. The Hippocratic Oath that doctors take. Hippocrates actually developed the first behavioral styles. They were based around weird fluids in the body and stuff like that. But he had the foresight to come up with this idea of that there are 4 behaviors. So I do a lot of work around those 4 behaviors. I don't call them DISC. I call them the colors. So red, yellow, green, and blue, because people remember colors better than letters. Okay. But when we do detailed profiles on people, we get 2 profiles coming up. We get one, which is what we call your adapted style, which is what is your behavior at work? And then we get your natural style, which is what is your behavior in your home environment and under stress. Because when we're under stress, we revert to the behavior that we would have at home.
Interesting.
Right. And so that's exactly what it is. So a lot of consultants and human resource consultants buy profiles from us because they're using that for recruitment, etc. And it's never 100% of the answer. It's 25% of the answer. But when you see profiles where somebody is completely suppressing part of their behavior in the work environment, but you know that as soon as you put them under stress, that part's going to arc up. That's where you see a problem coming. So that's how it's not just reading the profile and saying this is a pretty good person and they'll fit in well with our team. You start analyzing it down to that level where you say, are they suppressing a part of their natural behavior in the work environment? And a classic one we often see is someone who's dominant. So the dominant, or red as we call it. And in the workforce, you see their dominance is pushed right down. But you know what's going to happen as soon as you put them under stress, they're really going to pee people off, because they're going to suddenly emerge from this shell as this dominant, personality profile that's completely different to the rest of their time in the workforce.
Can they be coached to adjust to improve that?
Yeah, absolutely. And so part of it, and you'll see, this is not a fake display, by the way, behind me. It's actually a live display.
Yeah.
But part of the reason I have glasses here and different colored glasses is because when you're talking to somebody who has a red behavioral style, doesn't matter what your style is, that what we coach people to do is look at them through red glasses. Okay. And so there's an old saying that says, communicate with people in the way they want to be communicated with, rather than, if you think about realtors as a classic example, right? Go and look at a home that's open for viewing, and you walk in and you're Emily, and Mary walks in behind you, and the realtor will say, hi, I'm John, or Peter, Paul, whatever, and we'll take a deep breath and start rattling off at you all the features of the house. And then the person who walked in just behind you, they'll go same thing, right? And start rattling off all the features of that house. Now, part of the behavioral understanding is you ask them 3 or 4 questions first to pick up what's important to them. And then you tell them about the things that are important to them. So yes, you can be trained to be emotionally intelligent in that space, and that's a big buzzword today. A great friend of mine here in Perth has just published a book on EQ and emotional intelligence. But yeah, it's about becoming intelligent about the people around you. So can you teach people to behave differently? Absolutely. And you think about command and control in the military environment, right? It's critically important for military success that your troops react to a command, irrespective of what they're feeling. They got a headache, they took 2 Tylenol, they've got to react, okay? And so whereas you want in a work environment, you'd like, potentially, but that's under stress in the military, right? But you're planning something, you want people's input. Yes, you may still be command and control at the lowest troop level, but as a management team, you're looking for input. But in a military, in a stress military situation, it becomes the commander's command and control, right?
Right.
Direct them and they must do it. Okay. And so, yes, that's a behavior we teach people in the military there are times when you are part of the discussion and part of the learning, and there are times when you actually have to react. I mean, there's I don't know if you've seen an HBO show called Billions, okay? And it's like a Wolf of Wall Street kind of show. But there was a light, and so I'm often inspired. I wrote a blog about this. I'm often inspired. In the days pre-COVID, I used to travel a fortune as a professional speaker. And I was on a plane and I was listening to Billions in the background, and I was typing something else. I was working, sitting on the plane working. And there was a line in a show that I stopped, I rewound, I transcribed it, and I used it as a blog later on.
Okay.
And it was a manager of a Wall Street firm turning around and saying to one of her investors, "Don't worry, I'll be down there with the troops, in the mud with the troops." And he looked at her and he said, the reason he said, "That's not what we want you to do. We want you to holster your arms." She said something like, "I'll be firing with the troops." And he said to her, "No, as the commander, you've got to be back on the hill with a wide angle view of everything that's going on." He said, "Your people in the trenches," and it was a trench analogy, "have got a scope sight or a sight on their rifle. They have a very narrow field of vision. You as a manager can't have that narrow field of vision. Now that you've risen through the ranks to be that manager, you have to put your sidearm away and actually have this broad view of the world." And so it was about changing behavior. It was about changing her behavior from being out there gutsy, fighting, winning the deals, to stepping back and looking from the mountain to actually assess the battlefield.
Yeah. Well, I remember when I was a contracting officer for the government, we had contract specialists, and then we had contracting officers that were also like team leads, right? And so when we interviewed the contract specialist, we were looking for kind of things like that. Like a question might be, somebody on your team is in the middle of negotiations and they're having some problems with coming to an agreement with the contractor. What would you as the contracting officer do? And the answer we were looking for is, we're looking for people to talk more from a leadership perspective, how they would guide that contract specialist and offer support. But some people, their answer would be, "I'd go in there and I'd negotiate the deal." And that's not what you're supposed to do, because you're the leader now, right?
Yeah.
Different perspective. You're not supposed to just, how would that make that contract specialist feel if you go in and just finish off the deal? You're supposed to help guide them so that they can finish it. It's a different perspective.
No, completely. And in my finance business is a classic example of that, right? So in my book, I talk about a few things. And one of the things is how I have trained my staff. So how have I trained my staff? As an example, when you want to give someone bad news, right? So what's bad news in the mortgage industry? You didn't get your loan, you can't buy that property, right? Can't buy your dream house because you can't get a loan. And generally, I try and train the staff how to make that call. I wouldn't make that call from my office. I would walk into the open plan area where they all worked, and I would make the call to the client. They'd actually call them all around to stand around and listen to the call that I was making to the client. Now, all my staff under the same confidentiality, so it wasn't an issue of talking to the client in front of them. But what that did is it showed the client the staff, how I was making that simplistic call to a client to say, "I've really got bad news for you," or "I've got bad news. We can't get you a loan with ABC Bank at this fantastic rate, but XYZ Bank, maybe the rate's slightly higher," whatever. And how I would talk them through the high, we've bought the property, the low, we can't get the loan, but here is an alternative. And so I used that as a training experience for my team. Now I don't even get those calls. Now they'll come into my office and say, "Oh, by the way, I called your client, John, and I told him they didn't get his loan, but I gave him this alternative."
That's awesome, because you can give them a PowerPoint presentation on how to handle a tough call like that. But, getting a PowerPoint presentation versus actually watching somebody make that call, there's a huge difference between the two.
Well, it's also that so one of the philosophies in my book is never ask staff to do anything you would. And so part of it is I wanted to show the staff that I can do exactly that. Now, so occasionally they will come to me and say, "Look, you've got a better relationship with the client than I have, because the way it works, I still write mortgages. I mean, I'm still in that business, particularly during COVID. That was my office. I wasn't traveling. I'm still here in the office. This is being recorded from my office. So, they would come to me and say, look, you've got a good relationship with that client. And my team, a lot of them just do the processing of the mortgage, so the back end paperwork. But a lot of them will, I'll introduce them. I'll write to the client and say, Rachel from office is going to be looking after all your paperwork. I'm here strategically to talk to you. But, if you want to know, did we get your pay slip, just email Rachel directly, because there's no point in going through there to look at the strategy. I know what I'm good at. And that's one of the other revelations, is being able to know what you're good at and what you can give away, what you can give to staff to do and empower them. But that's exactly what it's about. So Rachel might come to me and go, listen, boss, it's a joke that she calls me boss, but no. She'll go, listen, I have a problem. That client is going to scream at me if I call them, just because you have a better relationship than I do. Please, can you call them? But that would be the only time that one of the team members would actually sort of divulge that responsibility. Most of the time they would go, yeah, no problem. They'll make the call, or they'll write the email and say to me, can I send it from your computer to the client?
So this is the link for people to download your book. Tell us the title of your book and, why people should read it. What are the kind of highlights of what you cover? Okay,
so the book is called Dive In, Lessons Learned Since Business School is the subtitle. It came out of, so what is it about? It's about philosophically three things. It says business is not simple. Business is not complicated. Sometimes you just have to dive in with a leap of faith and adjust your course while you're moving. So we tend to be over analytical. All right. Google has created a problem in the world. Okay. What is Google's problem? We have too much information.
Yeah.
And so, you wake up one morning, if you think back 20 years ago, 30 years ago, you woke up in the morning, you went, I've got a brilliant idea. I'm going to open a lemonade stand outside my house. Great. I'm going to open a lemonade stand. Go and do 12 days of research on Google, and find out the price of lemons. You just went, okay, I'm going to buy lemons at $1, and I'm going to buy sugar at $1. I'm going to mix it all together and sell cups of lemonade for $3. Whatever the numbers, doesn't matter. You kind of did some math and said, yep, I can make some money out of that. And you went off and did that business. That's philosophically how I look at opportunities in life, is to say, so, Henry Ford was asked why he was so successful. And he said he jumped at the good opportunities. And the interviewer said, Mr. Ford, how did you know which were the good opportunities? And he said, he didn't. He just kept. Now, there's a difference between chasing the next bright, shiny object and jumping at the opportunities. I'm not talking about the next bright, shiny object. I'm saying you do some considered research on a business or whatever, but at some point you have to take the leap of faith and dive off the cliff. And
don't you? I think also maybe what you're saying too is listen to our intuition and what our heart and what our body's telling us about this opportunity, because you can feel really expansive about it, and then maybe we just spend way too much time Googling and doing all this research, and then the analytical side of our brain says no. It seems like Henry Ford probably listened to his intuition too about taking things.
Yeah. I mean, when I started my first real business, I had some businesses as a teenager, and you get revelations from each business. So at 15 or 16, I worked at the electronics shop, and it was in the days when you sold car radios to people and car stereos, tape decks that always got the tape stuck and you pulled them out and the tape broke and all those things. And we'd sell them to people. And then I remember one Saturday I was working, I was probably in year 10 of school, year 11 at school, so the second or third last year of high school. And this woman said, oh, how does she have this installed? I said, oh, well, no problem. I can do anything. Come to my house at 2:00 in the afternoon and I'll install it. Anyway, not only did I not get paid, I messed up the inside of her car. I also had this major revelation about that whatever I do in life should be with my head, not my hands. And I realized soon enough that that's where my strength would lie. Mm-hmm. Even though I did engineering, my strength is still being with my head, not my hands. So that's but fast forward to 1990 when I started my first real business. My business partner and I were young MBAs. We just finished our MBA degrees. I actually just got married in 1990. And 6 months after we got married, I said to my wife, I'm going out to be an entrepreneur. She said, fine, whatever. She was working as a teacher, earning $1,000 a month, and said, well, we'll make it. Let's see what happens. So we did that. And my partner and I went out to teach the world how to run their businesses with one minor flaw. We'd never run a business. But that didn't stop us having the confidence, having come out of this MBA program. Is MBA the be all and end all? No, it isn't, and it's not for everyone, but that's a complete separate discussion. But we had the confidence to dive in and adjust our course. So we dived in, took us 3 months. We won a contract from a big electricity company. It wasn't a major contract, but it was enough to at least pay the bills for a few months. And then that contract was canceled. And we were sitting around going, what do we do now? And an organization we'd been dealing with said, why don't you guys, you're so well qualified, why don't you start teaching a course in marketing that they had offered? So they were the certification body, and we would teach the course and people would write an external exam. So we said, what have we got to lose? So we ran a few newspaper adverts. We got 20 students the first semester, and we started the education business. We did not go and analyze who the competitor. If we had analyzed our competitors, we would never have done it. We had players with no money and no technology against two very, very well-established big players. But yet within, we went from 20 students to 4,000 students over 5 years. Okay, so we were in the right place at the right time. And I have to say that there was other external factors that we didn't even understand. Mm-hmm. And 1990 was the year Nelson Mandela was released. And so in South Africa, there was a hunger amongst the formerly disenfranchised population for education because they had been suppressed. All the education had been suppressed by the apartheid government. So there was this natural hunger for education. So we were in the right place at the right time.
Wow.
And that was what created a lot of our growth. But we didn't overthink it.
Right. You didn't overthink it.
No, we didn't.
Did you, what is it? You said that you have been 6,000 feet underground in a mine. Did you do any overthinking to get down there, or why were you down there?
So I grew up in a fairly lower middle class family, and university education, like in the US, it costs you a lot of money. And so the only way I could get to university, I was quite strong academically at school. The only way I could get to university was if I got and so I applied for scholarships, and Anglo American, which was the biggest mining house in South Africa, offered me a scholarship. I mean, the bizarreness of it was that I went off from school being this cloistered, white kid growing up in the middle suburbs of Johannesburg, went off to university to be an engineer. And I didn't know what an engineer did, which is even kind of more bizarre. But anyway, I studied engineering. I got through my 4 years of my undergrad degree. And my commitment to Anglo American was to work on one of their mine sites for 2 years after graduation. So that's how I was shipped out to a mine called Vaal Reef. It was the largest gold mine in the world at the time. It had 9 shafts, and they were sinking a 10th shaft. And it's deep level gold mining. The average shaft at Vaal Reefs was about 7,000 foot underground. We were working and mining gold at 6,000 foot underground.
Wow.
Which has its own challenges, and probably being 21 and not really having any responsibility, you never thought about the fact that we had, X number of deaths a year in the mining industry, and safety standards weren't the greatest in South Africa. You got into the cage every day to go underground. It's called a cage because it is literally a cage. And you would drop down at 15 meters a second. And once you were underground, your first thought was, we want to go to sunshine level. We want to get back up to the top. That was what you thought about. I was 21. I was, this university graduate, one of 50-odd thousand staff on that mining complex, and probably one of less than 500 graduates of university on that team. So we had this sort of arrogance, which is a problem. Ego gets in our way. Arrogance gets in our way all the time. And at 21 or 22, you don't see that. And so the lessons I learned working underground came to me when I started my first business 7 or 8 years later. I actually then got to understand about management, and all the things that I never really allowed myself to understand when I worked on the mind because my ego got in the way. That was when I actually learned them, was when I started my first business. And I went back and went, oh, that was amazing. That was an amazing experience. But I never embraced it for everything I could have at the time. And so when I talk to young people, and I spoke at a school last week, which is a pro bono, just a talk that we do as part of our community service, I said to them, embrace every experience, embrace everything you can get. Don't necessarily overanalyze it, but just internalize it, because that's what's going to make you a better person in the future.
That's awesome. That's awesome. So, Rael, as we finish up, tell us a little bit about your podcast, the Business Excellent Podcast, right?
Yeah. So it's based around it's called the Business Excellence Podcast, but the website is actually called excellencepodcast.com, quite specifically because I think it's about business and it's about life. It's more focused on excellence in business, but we have a number of episodes about just being the best you can be, being that excellent person. We're at 81 episodes now. We have 2 episodes that drop every week. And the theme of it is looking at people's stories, getting to the backstory, I try not to have people on who don't have a backstory, who have, you need people who've got something that's changed their life and now they're out doing good for others. And some of those people are speaker buddies, and some of those are, one of the people I had on has started a truffle farm. Now, he started it and then sat back for, 10 years waiting for truffles to come up from the ground. It's a long time, and he was not a farmer and all those things. And now he exports 90% of his truffle around the world. To Lorna, who started a business called Chemo at Home, and she started 7 years ago doing chemotherapy for people in their home environment as opposed to the hospital environment. This is long before the pandemic. This was just because she felt as an oncology nurse that people wanted to be in their friendly environment doing this. And they were doing 2 treatments a month. They are now doing 1,200 a month post-pandemic because people don't want to go to hospitals.
I can imagine. I mean, when my former husband was sick with cancer, we had to drive an hour and a half without traffic because his hospital was at Georgetown. We were in Southern Maryland just to go in for the chemo treatment. It would have been awesome to be able to get that at home.
Yeah, so this is an amazing business. And I love the story behind it, why she started it. And Lorna was in her mid-50s when they started the business. Like, they didn't over-research it.
Right.
Her and Julie's a pharmacist, they were talking about it and said, let's do it, let's try it. And so they did. And every year their systems evolve. They didn't try to design all their systems. So those are the things that excite me. Those are the things that make me excited, because those are stories we want to share. Nishant Kasibatla, who's the mentalist, his episode comes out today. So Nishant was the world memory. Now that might sound a bit weird, but he talks about techniques for walking into a room and how you remember people's names.
To that episode, because I'm not always good at remembering names.
Yeah, and so, but he talks about how the same way we train our bodies, we have to train our mind to do that. Okay, so these are things that make people show up as their best self. They're either inspired by Lorna, who started Chemo at Home. They're inspired by Candace Mama, who her father was killed by an apartheid assassin in South Africa. She went to meet him. This is when she was 9 months old. When she was in her early 20s, she went to the jail to meet him and actually forgave him, and then helped him get parole. Okay, and then she wrote a book called Forgiveness Redefined, about her journey to forgiveness, right? And how that's affected her, and how her father's death affected her when she found a photo of the burnt out body, because not only did they kill him, they actually put him in a car and poured petrol over it and lit it. And so it was quite a gruesome story, which she found out at age 9. So, but the way she's gone through it, it's got nothing to do with business, but it's got to do with life and meaning. Yeah. And so we've had, all these amazing episodes. That's exactly what it's about. It's about sharing stories. That's what podcasts are. I mean, I'm on your podcast, and that's what we're doing. We're sharing stories.
Yep. And I'm going to be on your podcast too. And this is so fun. That's, one of the things I wanted to do when I left the Navy is to be able to have more conversations with people where I didn't feel rushed and I could really understand the story. And I've done about 135 episodes and I just love each and every one of them. And I really enjoyed having you on this podcast. Right?
Thank you. It's been a lot of fun. And through this amazing technology that we have, we can be 12 hours apart in time zones, but having a great conversation, and me getting a second coffee and you having a glass of wine or something. Yeah. But it's a different time of day. So no, that's fantastic. I love these conversations. I love where they go, and I love how they wind together with everyone's background, because ultimately we're all here for a purpose, and that's to be excellent, to be the best version of ourselves. And if we can help each other be that, then we've achieved our mission.
Yep, I love it. Thank you, Carl, Sean, and Martin, for watching, and for all of the other people that are going to listen to this episode once it's either on the replay or once it's published as a podcast episode. And thank you, Rael, for being on the Onward podcast.
Thank you, Emily. It's been great fun.
Thanks for listening. I put a link to Rael's podcast and his website and his free book in the show notes. Rael's book is entitled Dive In, Lessons Learned Since Business School, and the book was published in May of 2018, and it's intended to be a guide for people to take Rael's experiences and put the lessons learned into practice. His blurbs about the book says, "Business does not have to be complicated. Business can be simple. Take a breath, dive in, and adjust the course while you are moving." This book looks at 30 plus years of work and business on 2 continents, through startups to listed companies. It's a collection of business principles that underline the idea of sometimes just taking a leap of faith and diving in is all you need to succeed. Dive in, take a leap of faith. I can vouch for that, because that's what I did after retiring or graduating from working for the Department of the Navy for 38 years. I decided I wanted to become a personal coach. I wanted to become a podcast host. And although I had been a mentor my entire life to many different people and received mentorship, I had never been a coach. And so I completely switched careers, which is not easy to do, but I dove in. I took a leap of faith. And one of the things that I did, one of the coaching programs I invested in was a coaching program called Positive Intelligence, or Mental Fitness. And when we dive in, we realize that maybe we feel some mental stress, such as anxiety, frustration, or unhappiness. And perhaps some old patterns keep returning in our lives. If we want to make improvements in our mental fitness, we can. And by doing that, that helps us dive in. I learned that we can improve our mental fitness significantly within 6 weeks of practice. And with recent breakthroughs in neuroscience and technology, this can actually be measured. And by taking this program, I dramatically improved my performance and productivity while achieving a happier outlook and a calmer and clearer mind. I learned about my top saboteur, my hyperachiever. I knew I had this tendency, and I always thought it was a good quality. It enabled me to make it to the senior executive ranks in the federal government. Yet I was motivated by stress and anxiety, and my relationships suffered along the way. This mental fitness program changed my life, and that's why it's one of the programs that I coach. So if you are interested in changing your life, if you're interested in being less stressed, check out my website, emilyharmon.com, and go to offerings to learn more about the program. Because I loved it so much, it's now one of the offerings that I have. Thank you for listening today. Thank you for your support of the Onward podcast. I appreciate you. We're in this together. Let's move onward together.